If we select Via, that button then shows as selected, and it gives us some control over Via. First, we have a feedback that displays the room name and the room code, so when users walk in the room, they can simply look at the touch panel to be able to log into Via and present wirelessly. We also have a list box that displays the current presenters, along with other users that are logged into Via. It also shows who's presenting and who is not presenting. And we can toggle one of these to present one of those devices, or stop one of those devices from being presented. If we select the Blu-ray input, it switches to that. I'm going to select that device. In this case, we're going to use its serial, and we can see that the driver is for both TCP or UDP or serial. So we're going to select that and say Add. We're going to skip aliasing for now. We'll show aliasing a little bit later in this project. Then we're going to add another device, again from the database. This next device is going to be a Kramer Via. And we're going to use a Via Campus. Select that. That, you can see, is a TCP UDP device. So we'll control it over IP and say Add. Next, we're going to add a display. So add device from database. This is going to be an LG TV. For this, I don't want to put the actual model. So for device types, I'm going to click on that and scroll down until I find TV. For this one, we're going to control our TV over areas. We're going to add a new library with custom images. So we're going to go to the three-dot menu and say Add New Library. There's a couple different options here. The first thing we're going to do is give our new library a name. Scroll down to the bottom of your libraries. Click on it, and at the top, give it a new name. The next thing we're going to want to do is add images to this library. To do that, you can either drag the images directly in here, or you can browse your computer. I'm going to browse my computer for mine. The next one is Show/Hide Foreground. And the next one is Show/Hide Frames. These are the three different layers that you have to choose from on your pages. If you want to just drop something directly on your background, deselect the frames and the foreground, and anything you drop on your page will go to your background. There's a quicker way to do this too, if you want a full screen background image. So, I'm going to reselect mine. Take my background image in my custom library. Select my background image. Hold Shift, drag, and let go. Now both my pages are identical. The next step is to add some buttons to our pages. I'm going to go to my System page, go to my image library, and find the appropriate buttons. First, let's add some source buttons. So I'm going to go to my Envy, Sources, Rectangle. Here I can choose from various different button images. Now we know that the sources that we have are Laptop, Via, and Blu-ray. So first I'm going to look for a button that shows a picture of a laptop. Drag it on my page, and let go. Next, I'm going to look for a button for Via, drag it on my page, and let go. The last one I'll do is Blu-ray. Now, at this point, you can see that my images aren't really lined up too well on my screen. So what I can do is drag a lasso to select multiple. And then at the top, I have two different tools. I have an alignment tool and a distribution tool. First, I'm going to use my alignment tool to get them all straight vertically. If you notice, there's a dotted line around all of those. The dotted line is what you're going to align to. So if I select the Pick Alignment tool and say Align Left or Align Right, it will shift my images according to where that box is. In this case, I'm going to say Align Right. Now all my buttons are aligned vertically. The next thing I can do is also move them while they're multi-selected. To do this, I can either drag them or use the keys on my keyboard. To move things or size things faster while you use your arrows or your plus and minus, you can hold Shift on your keyboard and it will do it a little bit faster for you. Remember that the keyboard shortcuts can be found in the knowledge base that you can access from the Kramer Control Portal. The next thing we're going to do is add some text to our buttons. First, I'll select my laptop button. In the properties at the bottom, I select Text Box and type what I want it to say. Now it looks like it's invisible, but the text by default shows up as white. If you use a button that's not white, you'll probably see your text right now. Before I change the color, size, and font of my text, I'm going to give a label to all my others as well. For Via, I'm going to call it Via. And for Blu-ray, you guessed it, I'm going to call it Blu-ray. Now I can globally change things for all three of these buttons. Drag a lasso to multi-select. First, I'm going to change my font. The next thing I'm going to do is change the font color. Here you have a color picker to choose from. I'm going to go with gray. Now those words are a little bit too small, so I'm going to change the size. Here you can use the up and down buttons, or you can type in whatever size you want. The next thing I want to do is add a little bit of padding to move the text a little bit to the left of these buttons. The first thing I'm going to do is change my alignment. If you click on Alignment, you have 9 different options for text alignment. Here I'm going to say Left Center. Now that text shifts over to the left a little bit too much. Let's add some padding. Padding bumps it in just a little bit without changing both of them. And with my alignment, I can center it vertically. The next thing we'll do is go to our home page. At this point, I'm going to add a button that's the size of the entire page. This button, when touched, is going to click on the page on the left. Go to the plus above and Create Button. Here, start at the top left corner. Click and drag on the bottom right. Now we have an invisible button that spans the entire side of the page. At this point, I'm going to add a button that's the size of the entire page. This button, when touched, is going to start up my system and lead me to my system's page. To do that, let's show the foreground and frames. Click on the page on the left. Go to the plus above and Create Button. Here, start at the top left corner. Click and drag on the bottom right. Now we have an invisible button that spans the entire side of the page. That's a little big for my taste, so let's make it a little bit smaller and position it the way we want on the screen. I want center bottom. I'm going to add a little bit of padding here. And I'm going to change my font to the same as my buttons on the other page. Now when the user arrives in the room, they can look at the touch panel and touch anywhere on the touchscreen to start the system. Now let's add a navigation link so that our power button brings us back to the home page. We do this the same way that we did the home page link to the system page. The next thing we need to do is create our appropriate overlays. In this case, we're going to have 3 separate overlays. One for laptop, one for VIA, and one for Blu-ray. To do this, go to the left pane, click on the 3-dot menu, and add overlay. Now, what I like to do is make sure that my overlay is the overlay. The first one will be laptop. Next, let's copy and paste so that we have 3 different overlays that are the same size. Click on the overlay, Ctrl or Command C and V to paste. I'm going to name them appropriately. So, to do that, I'm going to make this a background. Size it a little. Here, the only thing that shows on the laptop overlay is a text label that says, "Please connect HDMI and use 1920 by 10." And add some text. Size it a little bit nicer, and change the font. Next, let's do the VIA overlay. On the VIA overlay, we're going to do a few things. Next, we'll do a new background with a text label for room name. And we'll copy that and paste it for room code. Change that in the text. And we'll copy that and paste it for room code. Change that in the text. Here I'm going to add some various buttons for transport control. First, I'm going to align. Now let's do the Blu-ray transport page. Go to the Blu-ray overlay, and let's add some buttons here for Blu-ray transport control. In my image libraries, I'm going to search for NV transport. Let's go with square. Here I'm going to add some various buttons for transport control. One thing we didn't show before is the distribution tool. What I'm going to do is drag a lasso around all these buttons. First, I'm going to align them on the top to make them straight. Then I'm going to distribute them evenly. To do that, I'm going to click on Distribute Horizontally. Now they're evenly spaced across from left to right. Let's talk a little bit about aliases with devices. Go to our Devices tab. And let's first take a look at the Kramer switcher VP440. If you double-click on that device, it will pull up your aliases in the center part of your screen. Aliases are quick ways to rename various functions within drivers. For example, things like inputs. Maybe you don't want your inputs to display as HDMI 1, HDMI 2, HDMI 3, but you want it to say laptop, via, Blu-ray. By specifying user-friendly names, it makes it a whole lot easier to do your programming. It can also save you time down the road, if somebody ends up rewiring the system and wires it differently. All you need to do is come here and change the alias for the various input that you changed, and it will associate across the entire project that you have. So if you have input commands that you're using across several different buttons, you don't have to change them at each button. You just need to change it at the alias. Let's go ahead and do some user-friendly names for our inputs. HDMI 1, we're going to call laptop. Inputs to display is align some of those extra buttons here. Laid out UI. Let's go ahead and save. To save, click on the icon on the top right. Remember that the save icon saves your project to the servers, and the publish icon saves to servers and publishes to the brain that you might have on site. Now it's time to add some function inputs. Maybe you don't want your inputs to display as HDMI 1. HDMI 2 we'll call via. And HDMI 3 we'll call Blu-ray. Those are the only three inputs that we're using in this system. For some devices, aliases just don't exist. Here's where you can see various commands and states for the source select category. Let's drag the input select command onto laptop, and it will ask us which input we want to use. Now we can see those aliases that we added show up here. Let's select laptop and say OK. Let's do the same thing for both via and Blu-ray. Change it from laptop to via. And then to Blu-ray. We're also going to do our volume. There's a whole lot more commands to use. Let's find set output volume level. Take that, drag it to your slider, and it will automatically apply both the send commands and the feedback commands. Now when you drag your slider, it will show what the level is, real time, based on the feedback of the switcher. For our mute button, this example, the first press on the mute button will turn mute on. The second press will turn mute off. Now that we've set our button to toggle, mute off. To look at the commands that we have on the buttons, simply double-click on the button. Here we can see that there are two taps. Tap 1 is for mute on, and tap 2 is for mute off. That there are two taps. Tap 1 is for mute on, and tap 2 is for mute off. To go back to where you just were, you can simply go back in your browser. Audio playing, and we shut the system down, the audio will stop playing. We're going to do that in our switcher. Go back to the VP440 driver, volume category, set mute, drag that to the power button. Change mute to on and say OK. Let's take a look at that power button to see what we have on there. Double-click on the button and it will show everything. First, we have a navigation function which brings us to the home page. Next, we have the power off command for the LG TV. Next, we turn mute on the switcher. What we want to add now is a TV power on command, mute off command. And let's switch to a default source, which would be laptop. First, let's do power for the TV. Select the LG driver, set power, drag it to the button, and let go. And we're going to turn the TV on. Next, go to the VP440. Volume, set mute. We're going to turn mute off. The last thing we'll do is switch to a default source. Change your category to source select. Drag the input select command onto the button. We want our default source to be laptop, so every time we start the system up, it's on the laptop input, because that will be used more than anything else in this specific system. The next thing we'll want to do is add functionality to our overlays. The first overlay is the laptop overlay. There's no real functionality here, just a message to say, please connect HDMI and use 1920 by 1080. Let's skip that. Toggle users to display and stop displaying through VIA. That functionality is under the video processing category. And all we're going to do is take toggle status and drag it right onto our list box. You can see here when you double click on the list box, there's two things applied. One is the command to toggle statuses, and the other is a state to change what's displayed within the list box. Because the VIA device already includes all of the commands and feedbacks, the system now knows to send. If I scroll down to states, I have a state for room code and for room name. The VIA device driver already knows to ask for the room name and room code regularly. So all we need to do is drag these states on the screen and display them the way we want. So first, let's take room code, drag that underneath room code on our screen, do the same thing for room name, and then together, we'll make them look the way we want them to look. Now individually, I'm going to change the name here so it displays a little bit differently. And now while my system is controlling VIA, it will know when the room code or room name changes, and it will display that appropriately on my page. That's everything we need to do for the VIA overlay. Let's move to the Blu-ray one. Now this is a very simple one. All we're going to do is apply changes the overlay in the frame to the laptop overlay. For VIA, we want the same thing to happen, but switch to VIA on the switcher and switch to the VIA overlay within the frame. And, just like you'd imagine, the same thing for the Blu-ray. So, let's go ahead and do that. We're going to double-click on the first button, which is Laptop. And here, click on the top right plus sign and select Update Property. By default, the update property is either an image or a text box. We want to change that. So instead of the laptop button changing, we want the frame to change. So, let's change the target widget from laptop to frame. To do that, change the frame, and the target property is a name. But we don't want to change the name. What we want to change is the overlay within that frame. So, select the overlay, and then select which overlay we want. Now it defaults to laptop, being that's the first one, but let's just select it anyway. Let's go back and repeat the same thing for VIA and for Blu-ray. Click the plus sign, update property, take the frame, drag it to the target widget. The target property is not name, it's overlay. And the overlay we want is VIA. Now I'm lazy, so I'm going to copy and paste and reuse this for the next. Select the update property, Control or Command C to copy, go back, go to the Blu-ray page, Control or Command V to paste. And now all we need to do is change from VIA to Blu-ray. Simple as that. Simply drag the input state to the lower part of the button under Events, and it will pop up a new window. Here are a couple of options. First, for trigger type, there's on change and on update. On change is simply when the input changes. Change the button selection, which is what we prefer. In the majority of cases, this is the selection that you'll use. On our button, we want to change the button image itself. So, the first thing we'll do is hit the plus sign and add a conditional. And then we can go ahead and delete the update property. What we'll do is drag that input state to the if and let go. Now this asks us, what input do we want to? Our conditional is if the laptop input is selected. What would you like to do? In that case, we're going to update a property of an image on this widget, meaning this button. Next thing we want to do is go to our Images tab. Find our source buttons. And find the specific button image that we used for our laptop input. If we click a single time, it will select that button image. Click a second time, it will change the state to the next, which is pressed. A third time will go to the selected image, and a fourth time will go to disabled. These are 4 different button image states that we have for these specific button graphics. So, what we'll do is go to the selected image and drag that to the update property. Now our conditional says, if the laptop has been selected, change this image to the selected image. We want to add a second condition for else. Click on Add Condition and select Else. What we'll do here is if any other input is selected, we're going to deselect this input but not affect any other buttons. Back to the default image. And drag that to this update property. We now have a complete conditional that's going to change the image selection for this input. When this button is selected, we're going to send the laptop input command. We're also going to run this conditional that says if the laptop was selected, select this image. If any other input was otherwise, your button will change text when different inputs are selected. Now there's a couple things we need to change here. We need to change the input, laptop to input, via. And we need to change the specific button images as well. So, go to your Images tab, find via, and drag that to the default update property. Do the same thing for the last input. Go back, double-click on the Blu-ray button, go to Devices, drag our input state. This is deselected, so we'll say OK. Click on the Update property, paste, delete the text update property, change the laptop to Blu-ray, go to our images, and find the Blu-ray image. Go to Selected, drag that to override that image, bring it back to default and drag that. Our sources look to be something a little more acceptable. The last thing we'll do is change our mute button. If we double-click on our mute button and scroll down to the bottom in our properties, you can see that there are two different image states that you can use, both for pressed and selected. So, there's toggle image 1, toggle pressed image 1, toggle image 2, and toggle pressed image 2. This gives you the ability to have visual feedback on the screen when you toggle through your different button states on your page. To do this, and find the image that we want when the button has been selected. Click through to find Selected. Drag that to toggle image 2. And then back to pressed for toggle pressed image 2. Now our mute button image will track along with the way that we press it for mute on and mute off. The last thing we need to do before we're ready to publish is assign our devices to. Now our mute button image will track along with the way that we press it for mute on and mute off. The last thing we need to do before we're ready to publish is assign our devices to various hardware gateways. The first thing we need to do is add a brain. To do that, click on the three-dot menu and add hardware. The brain we're going to use is an SL240C. Select Add Brain and Next. The brain we're going to use is an SL240C and select Create. Now we can drag our devices onto the various connections that we want on our brain. The switcher is going to connect to serial 1. The VIA campus is going to be an IP connection, so we'll do that one last. The LG TV is going to connect to serial 2. And the Sony Blu-ray will connect to IR1. To assign an IP gateway, select the three-dot menu and say Add Hardware. What we want to do here is name it VIA and select Add Network Gateway. Here we enter the IP address of VIA so that we can control it. And select Create. Now we have a network gateway. All we need to do is apply VIA to that gateway. Select that device and drag it to the gateway. Now that we're ready to publish, it's time to do one final thing. If you look both for aliasing, I have an error for my LGV alias and an error for my VIA Campus alias. Let's take a look and see if we need to address it. The next error is an alias for VIA. Let's take a look. If we scroll down to check out the aliases, we can see that these are pretty much aliases that we don't really need to use for the various functions that we're using for VIA. If you're using some of these functions, you'll need to check out some of these aliases. At this point, we're ready to go ahead and publish. To publish, click the Publish button at the top right part of your screen.